Maybe she's already at rest with the Lord she loved so much. And if that ends up being the outcome, we'll have to learn to accept it. But the emptiness of not knowing is consuming us. We need her to come home. That's why, as a family, we've decided to offer a reward of our own. When you look at Savannah's video today, the language used, and that drastic jump in the reward amount, what do you think the strategy was behind all of that? What was the FBI's playbook behind the scenes with the Guthrie family? Well, the first thing is to break down the initial messages. I'm talking about those communications from when the ransom notes first showed up, when we still thought this was a traditional kidnapping for ransom. Those messages were coldly crafted by the FBI, working in full and complete coordination with the family. But then we saw Savannah a week ago. That was different. It was more visceral, much less rehearsed. It was a desperate plea for leads. What we're seeing now is that pure, overwhelming, heartbreaking emotion that comes from the deepest kind of uncertainty. In the shadows away from the cameras, there's a whole team of FBI investigators moving the pieces. They've got victim specialists and negotiators who are most likely still deeply involved in the case. Although, to be honest, I doubt the kidnapping for money theory is still a real line of investigation at this point. So you've got these specialists working hand in hand with the family. The investigators are giving it everything they've got to identify new leads. They're trying to apply pressure corner whoever did this and ultimately make an arrest that allows them to prosecute the perpetrator and find Nancy. The role of the victim specialists is different. They focus on the family's mental health, genuinely looking out for their well-being in this chaos. It's a devastating moment. They're trapped in that limbo of nameless grief, you know. There's no closure. There's no end in sight. It's a traumatic way to grieve because the answers just don't come. You feel powerless. That's why at this point, the specialists talk to the family and they feel an urgent need to act. They need to feel like they're helping. The family's $1 million reward is their way of trying to force useful leads to surface. It's not just about getting a lot of calls, but about raising the quality of the information so the investigation can move forward. It's part of their healing process, but it's also a calculated move they're carrying out alongside the official investigators. Just a few minutes ago, Tucson didn't just shake, it literally detonated. What started as a quiet search for a missing person has escalated into an all-out credibility war. Tommaso Cioni, the private investigator hired for the case, just fired back at the sheriff with a statement so sharp it split the press conference in two. And here comes the psychological twist. He's accusing the sheriff's office of fabricating lies. Yes, lies about Nancy Guthrie's disappearance. It's been 24 days now since they took our mother out of her own bed, under cover of night. We're still holding on to the hope of a miracle. We still believe she could walk back through that door. Although we're realistic, we know she might be lost. Or that she might no longer be with us. An 84-year-old woman who vanished into thin air before sunrise. The security system was disabled. There are no confirmed suspects or actual ransoms, and now a public showdown over who's hiding the truth. Why would such an experienced investigator risk his reputation by challenging the authorities on camera? Why does the Pima County Sheriff's Department feel such urgency to clarify what's been said? Why does this feel less like a search and more like a chess match where nobody wants to lose? When Savannah Guthrie, the face of NBC's Today Show, came out asking for answers, the entire country stopped to listen. But tonight the spotlight has shifted. It's no longer just about a disappearance, but about control of the narrative. Because when officials and private investigators clash like this, one thing becomes very clear: somebody doesn't like what's being said. The question is no longer just where Nancy Guthrie is, but who's manipulating the story. Stick around because this just got political. Good morning, everyone. I assume you all know the rules of this room. I'll try to make sure most of you, if not all, get a turn to ask questions. But last time was total chaos with people shouting from every direction. I'm asking for your patience. Listen carefully to what your colleagues are asking. Sometimes you insist on asking the same thing twice, and I assure you you're going to get the exact same answer. So, make the most of this time. I'll allow one question and one follow-up per person. Is that clear? Before we start the round, I have a couple of remarks to make. First, I want to extend our deepest condolences to our colleagues at the State Department of Public Safety for the tragic loss of 2 of their members last night. There was a helicopter accident in northern Arizona. I ask that you keep them in your prayers. Colonel Goldberg and his team will deeply appreciate it. Moving on with this. I know you saw it last night. I try to speak loudly, but I don't want to shout. They tell me I speak too softly. But the moment Tommaso Cioni's statement hit social media, Tucson simply stopped breathing. Not literally, but almost. Because this wasn't a simple bureaucratic disagreement buried in legal paperwork. We're talking about something public, deliberate, and calculated. Cioni didn't just whisper his doubts. He threw them into the air like a challenge. Standing in front of a generic office building hounded by camera flashes, and with a row of microphones stacked like dominoes in front of him. He chose every word with surgical precision, although the message behind them was anything but subtle. He claimed that the narrative around Nancy Guthrie's disappearance was being distorted. Distorted, that was the exact word. That single term set off an immediate media firestorm. They simply refused to answer. How do they think the suspect managed to get inside the house? Was the door unlocked? Did they perhaps have a key? Look again, I'm not going to get into details about whether or not there was forced entry. But what exactly was being distorted? Was he referring to the security system that was conveniently disabled? Or maybe to that gap in the timeline between 2:13 and 2:47 in the morning, when there wasn't a trace of movement? Or the fact that Nancy's phone, wallet, and car were all still there, untouched, as if she had simply vanished into thin air? Just days earlier, the sheriff was swearing that the investigation was methodical, strictly evidence-based, and progressing properly. Properly. Another word that today sounds loaded with venom. Because if everything is going so well, what's behind all this public friction? Why this sudden urgency to issue clarifications? And where did that obvious tension in the latest Pima County Sheriff's Department briefing come from? When a reporter dared to ask whether outside investigators' opinions were getting in the way of the case, the sheriff's jaw tightened instantly. He avoided mentioning Cioni's name. Someone out there knows something, was all he said coldly. He didn't need to name him. And in the middle of all this comes Savannah Guthrie, the anchor of NBC's Today Show, always polished on camera. She's a woman used to telling other people's tragedies, not living them. Her heartbreaking plea last week completely changed the tone of the story. The perfect cadence of the news disappeared. In its place, we saw a desperate daughter asking for help and offering a reward, as she said, "If anyone knows anything at all, please speak up. Help us bring our beloved mother back home." The video racked up millions of views. And right now, when public empathy is at its peak, this head-on collision happens. Coincidence or an inevitable collision? Sources close to the case with whom we've spoken personally to understand the situation say the tension had been brewing behind the scenes for days. Fights over the messaging, and above all, over how much the public should know. Because here's the uncomfortable truth that nobody dares to say out loud in cases of this magnitude: perception is the only currency that matters. Every word carries weight. Every silence gets dissected to death. And when a private investigator and the sheriff's department end up on opposite sides of the same story, what you have is a complete fracture. Cioni swears he was hired to find new angles. The sheriff, on the other hand, insists they're already exhausting every viable lead. Both claim to be after the same goal, finding Nancy. But when two professionals pretend to be aligned while contradicting each other publicly, people start asking some really dark questions. Is this strategy or simply control? In Tucson, opinion is split right down the middle. Some argue that law enforcement has to protect the evidence at all costs. Others, however, believe that without transparency, there's no trust. And in this era of viral clips and round-the-clock commentary, silence inevitably gets confused with secrecy. The most unsettling part is that Nancy Guthrie still hasn't been found. Not a sighting, not an official suspect, not a single clear motive. Nothing. All that's left is a timeline full of holes, a security system that shut down, and a power struggle over who controls the narrative. Because when credibility becomes the main headline, the investigation stops being about the crime and turns into something else. Tonight, there's only one certainty. This is no longer just a desperate search. It's a direct standoff. A dead end. And those duels rarely end peacefully. They feel they've given it everything, that they've analyzed every last fiber and every trace of DNA available. They reviewed every possible security camera, and just when you thought the tension couldn't get any higher, reality slaps you in the face. Just hours after Tommaso Cioni's public rebuke, something new started circulating through the hallways. Something murky. They were internal memos. Nobody confirmed them, nobody denied them, but they're very real to the people sharing them in whispers. documents that supposedly detail adjustments to the Pima County Sheriff's Department's communication strategy. Hold on. Let's stop right there. Why would the investigation of a missing person need a communication strategy adjustment? That single phrase put the whole internet into detective mode. Forums exploded, and armchair analysts started picking apart every comma. Former law enforcement officers turned commentators dedicated themselves to analyzing the press conferences frame by frame, looking for a sign. Suddenly, the mystery wasn't just Nancy Guthrie's disappearance anymore. Now it was all about appearances, about optics. In a later interview, Cioni reaffirmed his position, but he did it carefully, without throwing direct accusations. He didn't name names, but he raised questions. Sharp questions that point straight at the wound. Why were certain surveillance records labeled not concerning before the full forensic analysis was completed? Why did they say the security system failure was probably technical, before outside experts had a chance to review it? The other lines of investigation were publicly dismissed as mere useless speculation. Look closely at the pattern that's forming. It all comes down to the language. It's always the language. Meanwhile, the sheriff stayed firm, projecting absolute control. He made a point of reminding everyone that this isn't a TV show. Real investigations are slow, heavy, very deliberate. They're methodical. They demand patience. But the tension at that last press conference was something you could feel on your skin. A reporter went straight to the point. Are you suggesting that Mr. Cioni's comments are hurting the case? The sheriff was silent for just a second. Someone out there knows something that can bring her home, he finally answered. If you've been waiting and you're not sure what to do, let this be your sign to step forward now. He paused long enough that on social media they turned it into a viral 10-second video. What I'm saying, he answered very cautiously, is that unverified narratives can seriously complicate the integrity of the investigation. And that's when everything blew up. That sentence was a bombshell, because we're no longer talking about a simple disagreement between two men. We're talking about the integrity of the story. Savannah Guthrie was watching all of this, while she kept pleading for any lead about her mother. She was in an impossible position, backing the police on camera or acknowledging her family's private investigator. Her latest appearance on NBC's Today Show was strikingly restrained. She didn't mention Cioni at any point. There was no criticism for the sheriff. Just one phrase she repeated over and over: what we want is clarity. Clarity. A word that has now become the unofficial slogan of this whole strange and dark tragedy. Behind the scenes, sources say the friction wasn't sudden. There were heated debates about releasing more neighborhood video. Discussions about whether to disclose certain car sightings. Conversations about how many raw details the public could really handle. All without compromising the pending interviews. And here's the uncomfortable reality that nobody can ignore anymore. When two forces investigate the same thing in parallel, even when they're after the same goal, an ego clash is almost an inevitable fate. But when that lack of alignment becomes public, perception changes. People in Tucson are now divided into camps. The sheriff's team, Cioni's team, and then a third group, the silent majority, asking a simpler question. Why does this feel like a chess game? Because between press conferences and measured words, something is getting lost. An 84-year-old woman is still missing. Every headline about internal fights threatens to overshadow the only thing that truly matters. Nancy Guthrie has not been found. The story keeps shifting. What's at stake is getting more dangerous for everyone. If this really is about controlling the narrative, the next move will be more decisive than anyone can imagine. Another question coming our way is about personnel. We know there are still dozens of agents working this case. Many are right there in Tucson. But a high-ranking law enforcement official told NBC something revealing. They're concentrating part of the team at the FBI's field offices in Phoenix. This doesn't mean they're giving up. They say it's simply the place where investigators can focus and work better. That's where they analyze intelligence and review all the evidence, including thousands of hours of video footage. An FBI official says they have to watch every second of that footage in real time, folks. An exhausting effort. And just when Tucson thought things would calm down, the opposite happened. The atmosphere got much more tense. Late last night, sources confirmed that FBI observers have been quietly reviewing the coordination of procedures. Let's be clear, this isn't a takeover. It doesn't mean there's misconduct, but it does mean there's outside oversight. And oversight changes the atmosphere. Behind closed doors, people are saying meetings ran much longer than usual. The briefings became more tight-lipped. Statements became shorter. Bring our beloved mom home was the only plea. Whether to celebrate a miraculous return or to honor the brave, noble, and beautiful life she always lived. Be the light. The words got sharper because when a case goes national, the pressure is something else. When the daughter of a major TV figure asks for answers, every move you make has real consequences. This is where the maze gets complicated. A respected former prosecutor suggested on condition of anonymity something unsettling. He said these public clashes between investigators can unintentionally affect future legal proceedings. In other words, a disaster. If charges are filed, every clip from the press conferences could be used in court. Every mistake, every pause, every word said wrong. Suddenly, it's not just about finding Nancy Guthrie anymore. It's about protecting the validity of whatever comes next. The reward goes up. Money is no issue. The problem is the information. And here comes the part that chills the blood. Citizen tips have gone up, they say, but along with them came the false leads, adding a thick layer of uncertainty to the atmosphere. Is so much media exposure actually helping, or did it end up smothering the case? Tommaso Cioni stays calm in front of the cameras, but behind the scenes, sources close to him say he's pushing with an almost obsessive intensity. He's demanding massive data analysis and complex digital maps. Meanwhile, the sheriff projects an unshakable authority, prioritizing cold evidence over any emotion. Two different paths, two opposing philosophies for finding one single woman. In Tucson, the air feels different now. There's a low rumble in the supermarket aisles at the gas stations, even in the church parking lot. People aren't just asking about Nancy anymore. Now they're questioning who to trust. The thing is, once doubt seeps into a story, no matter how small, it stays there. This case is no longer just a mystery. It's a test under the magnifying glass. The national media is already circling, hovering like birds of prey. The analysis and the criticism just keep piling up. And meanwhile, with every second that passes, the clock ticks louder and louder. The longer Nancy Guthrie remains missing, the more unbearable the pressure becomes for the sheriff, for Cioni, and for the entire system. There are no resignations, no internal investigations, no formal accusations. But make no mistake, reputations are on the line here, and they're entirely dependent on how this ends. If they find something tomorrow, all this conflict will become a simple footnote. But if the silence persists, the questions will turn into daggers. Because behind every debate, every headline, and every strategic pause, there's a reality that survives, and it's simply devastating. An older woman vanished before dawn. Her home was left in the dark. Her trail went cold, and now the war of words will define how this story gets remembered. One thing is certain, the next move, whether it's a discovery, a clarification, or a new statement, is going to shake everything up. It won't go unnoticed. Tucson is watching. The whole country is watching. And the truth, well, the truth tends to hide right there in the silence between what's being said. Now I want to know what you think. Because this is much bigger than a press conference, a comeback, or a simple sensational headline. An 84-year-old woman disappears before sunrise. A security system that all of a sudden shuts off. There are two forces investigating in parallel, but the fiercest battle isn't being fought in the field. It's happening right in front of the camera. I'm asking you, when the authorities ask for patience, do you see professionalism or an attempt to protect themselves? And when an independent investigator questions the official version, do you see courage or just a desire to complicate things? If both sides say they're after the same thing, who would you give your trust to? Leave it in the comment. Do you think this public feud is helping keep the case from being forgotten, or is there a risk of turning a search into a spectacle? Don't fool yourselves. Perception shapes power, and power determines outcomes. If you believe transparency is the only way, speak up now. If you think strategy should be handled in secret, defend it. But don't just sit there watching from the outside. Nancy Guthrie is still missing. Keeping this visible is vital. Give the video a like, not for the drama, but to keep this face out there. Subscribe. When the next statement drops, you're going to need the deep analysis, not the soulless filtered version we always get. Share this. Sometimes, the right eyes see what everyone else missed. We'll keep tracking every development, every detail, every shift in tone, and every strategic move. Because, in stories like this, the silence speaks, and we're listening.